want to thank Ari Katz, who can now catch his breath and cough. And, you know, Ari, we who know you just are amazed by your steadfast purpose. This being program number 443 on Zoom, and that's with COVID today. You are a gift to all of us. I want to pause before I celebrate the opportunity to be with Rabbi Finley, to honor Rabbi Shalom Podwal and his wife Dalia. And as Mordecai was telling me just before we went on, Rabbi Podwal was the rabbi in Long Beach at Beth Shalom and was the first rabbi to hire Rabbi Podwal as a Jewish educator in his early high school days. And so to, give kavod to my teacher and friend, Rabbi Podwal. And Rabbi Podwal is at Congregation B'nai Israel, but Congregation B'nai Israel wouldn't be flourishing without Rabbi Fumberg and with recently ordained but long-serving Canty Amy Robinson Katz, both having gained their education at the Academy of Jewish Religion. So I hope, Rabbi Finley, you feel an honorary member of CBI because you are a major shaper of the religious experience that we share there as a community. And last, just to add my voice to add my voice in honoring Mark Bialy, it was Mark's enthusiasm for your teaching that prompted me to make an appointment to visit with you in Venice, which is part of my foundation for this conversation. There's one more piece of that foundation that I want to bring to everybody's attention, and that's a Zoom conversation that you did just a year or so ago with Rich Roll Podcast. That's Rich like Richard. It's 2 hours and a quarter conversation, which is about more than twice the time we have today, and very focused on your spiritual psychological teachings. So Rich Roll Podcast, if you enjoy, as I know you will this time with Rabbi Finley, is a place to continue keeping company with a great teacher. What I look to do in our time today is set up a public conversation with the people, sharing it. So I have about 35, 40 minutes to set that foundation for what is at this point about 50 more minutes. A place I'd like to begin with you, Rabbi Finley, is in the Bible. Who's your favorite biblical personality that comes to mind? Who's your Rebbe from the Bible?
I'll answer that question in about 1 minute. First of all, I want to also thank Ari Katz. I want to thank you, Mark Bialy. Mazal tov to Amy, fine, outstanding student. Much gratitude and fondness to Rabbi Shalom and Dalia Podwal. Very, very fond memories. They're beautiful to our entire family. You should all know that I spent my first 9 years of life in Orange County. I actually grew up in Anaheim before we moved from Anaheim to Compton in 1964. All right, so my favorite character in the Bible, I'm glad you put it that way because I do see the Bible as having literary characters. The Bible is in most parts very finely written literature with great literary depth. Very well-drawn characters with great archetypal psychological dimensions. So when I think about a favorite character, it comes down to a favorite narrative and a favorite archetypal psychological understanding. I would say the greatest scene in the Bible is Job's confrontation with God at the end of the book of Job. So of many characters that I could mention, I think putting Job in the Bible, especially Job's shaming of the divine in the Bible, is such a high point in human literature that I'll start there for now.
And say more about how you're identified with Job in that moment.
I'm identified more with the courage that it took to put Job in the Bible, because remember, Job is the ideal Jew, although the Bible does not say that he's Jewish, but when you look at the introduction to Job, he's the person who fulfills the biblical ideal of a human being. So if you look in the book of Proverbs, he's a person who's yashar v'tov, he's straight, he's good, he has all the qualities that the Bible wants us to have. But what does it get him? It gets him, now remember, this is a piece of literature. It gets him the attention of Satan. And so when God, as it were, in this piece of literature, is holding court, and Satan says, oh, I noticed one of your people down there, and your person Job is very good. God says, yeah, Job's my main man. And Satan says, yeah, because you keep blessing him. And here we have the theology of the Bible exposed. God promises blessing to the good, but from a perverse sense, you can say, well, people aren't really good, they're just seeking blessing. And this is the basic problem with any kind of gospel of prosperity, any kind of theology of God's beneficence, is, are we good to receive blessing, or do we receive blessing because we're good? Well, you can never know that until you can examine the darkest chambers of the human heart. So God unleashes Satan against Job. So the book of Job is about, you might say, the perfidy of God, how Satan manipulates God. And at the end of the book, when Job says, I want an answer, and this is something that Job, again, as a literary character, he will not bow down. He won't let go. He says, I know I did not deserve this, and I want an answer. His friends line up and say, well, you must have done something. He goes, yeah, well, what was it? And it's an incredible literature of resilience. God appears out of the storm to try to cower Job with God's power. Job's not impressed. At the very end of the book, Job says something like this: I heard of you, but now I know you, and I pity humanity. It's Job's confrontation to God. You have to read the Jack Miles chapter on Job. And I can just imagine, if this were ever staged, who's going to blink first? And God blinks, and God is then angry at Job's so-called friends who defended God and said, you should have been like Job, because Job was a person of truth and resilience. But the greatest thing is, if the Bible presents a theology that is mostly captured by the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Proverbs, the book of Job completely undoes it. So here we have the brilliance of putting together the founding library of Jewish thought and civilization and putting in the book that undermines the entire project. And then we're told, read all of this together and you figure it out. Now, I love that. I love that the Bible contains its own, its own undermining, and that, and many other parts of our tradition as well. We have something, and then something undermines that, and the tradition respects us enough to be able to work all this through.
I never focused on that piece that you just described of Job saying to God, and I pity humanity. How do you understand that?
As it says, nichamti al afar ve'efer, I pity dust and ashes, which is a term that refers to humanity. God, a God who would unleash Satan against an objectively righteous person is a God to be terrified of. So Jack Miles titles that chapter Fiend. Now remember, it's a literary character. It is not God. We always have to remember, now I'm saying this not as a non-Orthodox Jew, that what the Bible has, according to Jack Miles' wonderful book, God: A Biography, it has, the Bible has at least 20 different depictions of the divine, and some of them are, don't comport with each other. So when one says, I believe in God, one question is, well, which one of the many depictions of God in the Bible? So if someone ever says to me, well, why did God do this? I say, why did the author of that section have God do that? Because remember, standing between us and the God of the Bible is the author and the author's understanding of God. So I'm very careful to say that the God of the Bible is a literary creation of people who experience God, but then share that experience of God in a literary manner. And while I might admire the literature, I don't have to agree with their depiction. Now, the book of Job is an excellent example of the literature, because the book of Job is not there I don't think that the author's experience of God was that, but rather the point of the author is to completely undermine the theology of Deuteronomy and Proverbs, that if you're a good person, good things happen. And if you're wicked, God will punish you. And we all know it's not true. Well, who's going to come out and say it? Well, the book of Job comes out and says it in the most dramatic way imaginable.
So regrettably, our time is limited. So I have to be kind of, focused.
Sure.
And where we're going with the conversation is toward the practical, because part of your gift is as a spiritual coach. And I want to allow you time to share some of that insight. But on the way, we're still now with God. We're with the God depicted in the book of Job. How would you characterize God, your God?
My God, my personal relationship with God.
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
It's very much informed by Hasidic Lurianic Kabbalah. It's not really a biblical depiction. It's a much more mystical Hasidic experience, I would say.
Go ahead and give us a peek into that relationship.
Well, first of all, it's utterly real for me. So it's not a dogma that I can share, but more of an experience. It begins with the idea of the tapping into the infinity of the divine. And therefore, it's ultimately mystical. The Ein Sof, and Amy may remember that when I would introduce Jewish mysticism, I wouldn't say Ein Sof as ultimate extension. That's where many people think of infinite. They think the ongoingness of the universe, but rather pure being, infinite in extension and infinite in density, obsidian luminosity. So you can only understand it by oxymorons, where language has to break apart. And in the ultimate mystical search for the divine, we transcend into the realm of the Ein Sof. We arrive bereft of language. We re-enter language and then have to find metaphors. And so when you talk about this kind of belief system, as it were, it's ultimately poetic, symbolic, and metaphoric. Now, it's very deeply shaped by the system of the 10 sphirot that anybody can look up. I've given it lifetime study. It deserves lifetime study. But the 10 sphirot are human depictions of the inner life of the divine. The Hasidic interpretation of the 10 sphirot, the 10 emanations that are the inner life of the divine, is to show that these are also depictions of the inner life of each human being. So each of us has a configuration internally of the 10 sphirot of the divine. An added dimension to this is the work of Isaac Luria, where he says that in the, again, beginnings of creation, and beginning is a metaphor, obviously, the divine experiences a breakage. And therefore it's called Shivirat HaKilim, the breakage of the divine mind. That divine breakage is communicated in human beings. We all carry our own patterns of divine breakage. And therefore our purpose in life is to understand each of our own personal breakage. For example, chesed and loving kindness, gevura, boundary setting, logic, judgment and judgmentalism. So there's 7 of these psychological emanations, 3 of them more spiritual. Every person has them, and of the lower 7, everyone has a broken configuration. So our work in this world is, first of all, the insight to understand our own configurations, understand the nature of our own brokenness, and bring repair to the brokenness. Another little element of the Hasidic dimension is that the broken shards were encased in what are called husks, klipot. And the religious life is dedicated to breaking husks and releasing sparks. So as we do this work, there are moments of transcendence and transformation that register spiritually, and I would even say physically sometimes, when in some interpersonal moment with another person or some kind of internal spirituality, you can actually feel a release of a spark within. So it's Kabbalistic in being devoted on the 10 sphirot. It's Hasidic, that the 10 sphero are focused on the inner life of the human being. It's further Lurianic in that it focuses on the breakage of the divine, and then the Hasidic practices of releasing the sparks. Now, each of these is worthy of a year of teaching, but you asked for the basic outline of my own experience with the divine, so I've gone ahead and given it to you.
I am identified with the psychological wisdom of the 10 sphirot. And again, I point people toward that longer podcast where you have time to develop some of that teaching. But I, with the familiarity of sphirot, see that as an essential map. But yet, as a listener, I'm also left with the question, what does it mean to you to pray?
Okay, so again, when you go into the world of Hasidic prayer, it is not the normal vocabulary. We use the same words, but internally, it's not about beseeching. It's not overtly penitential prayer, although I do have that in my prayer life. Tefillah goes through a few different levels. One in the Bratslaver practice is Hishtapchut HaNefesh, which is the outpouring of the soul, which is to find your own spiritual depths and present it out toward the divine. So there's a constant connecting with the inner chambers of your heart and allowing it to flow. Another part of that is called Hitbonenut, which is an essential part of what I teach, which is contemplation and self-examination as an act of tefillah. This is a key part of Musar teaching as well. So that for me is tefillah. Also hitbodedut, which is meditation per se, isolation with the divine. And then liturgy. So I love the liturgy, but I experience the liturgy as the deepest kind of poetry. You know, I've been saying the liturgy for forever. So it's not that I'm reading it for information but rather each bracha, there is a wonderful play in Hebrew. The word bracha means a prayer, and the word brecha in Hebrew means a pool. So I had a mystical experience once where I experienced myself as diving into each bracha as a pool of water and swimming inside the pool. So for me, davening the prayer book is swimming through pools of meaning. And I think this is only cultivated because of my Hasidic spiritual practice.
Now, one of the things that I found remarkable, which relates to this topic of prayer, is how you start your day and the kind of self-reflection that you engage in as you start your day. Talk about how you start the day and your own hitbodedut, your own inner preparation.
Okay, so I recommend to people 9/10 hitbonenut, self-examination, 1/10 hitbodedut, if you ever get there, because people get into trouble in life not because they don't have enough mystical experiences of God. It's because they don't examine themselves well enough and they don't regulate themselves well. I start my day with a virtue practice. So anybody who's taken my virtue courses knows you start with, today I will not anger, I will not criticize other people, I will not complain to people about themselves, and I will not condemn other people. I will not accuse, blame, label, etc., etc., etc. And that's, I call, a wall of virtue. If you have something to say to somebody, you find a kind, clear, direct way to say it without criticizing, complaining, condemning, or engaging in escalating conflict. No excuses. You will fail, and that's when you do teshuvah. That's part one. Now, this is over the bathroom sink. Part two is, and if somebody's upset with me, no justifying, explaining, defending, denying after a couple of go-arounds. It does not work with an upset person. I call this the bad Jedi. You can find this on my website. So people who take my virtue classes, this is life-changing, utterly life-changing when people forego what I call the 4 C's: criticizing, complaining, condemning, escalating conflict, and the bad Jedi after a couple of tries. I say to people, you take a breath, don't talk, don't say what your yetzer hara wants to say. It's not going to come out well. And figure out some way to calm the conversation down and get back to a conversation of truth. And most people get into trouble with other people because they get so upset, so frustrated, they end up criticizing others, or they feel so set upon that they start acting defensively. And I say, give it a couple of tries to calm somebody down, but if it doesn't work, you got to figure out a way to calm this. I call that the virtue practice. And the reason I focus on it is in all my years of counseling, I began to notice that just about every couple whom I counseled had the exact same pattern. So for all their differences, they were doing the same thing. In fact, you can actually replace the conversation with, I'm okay, you're not. No, 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 no. I'm okay, you're not okay. No, I'm really okay, you're not okay. Well, I might be not okay, but you're actually worse than not okay. So it just goes around and around. I just say, let's just cut out that part and try to find out the truest things in our hearts. And so I discovered that most relationships in trouble are engaged in patterns. Eric Berne, who wrote Games People Play, calls them games that can be busted. We're going to put that aside. But I want to see how crucial it is. Many people don't progress in their spiritual lives because their day-to-day lives are so unsettled. They're so angry, resentful, afraid, run by guilt, run by shame, run by confusion. There are so many disturbances in the inner life that when people say, I don't feel connected to God, I would say you're not connected to your core self because there's too much of this noise of negative ego states. So this crisis of consciousness. Now, crisis of conscience would be a moral question, and I have a doctorate in moral philosophy, so I can talk about that. But when I think of consciousness, I think of people for whom their unconscious ego states are in constant states of disruption and plaguing us internally. So that first virtue practice makes sure that whatever's going on inside of me, I don't inflict on others. Now, my second practice is the deeper one, and that's a deep practice of what I call cultivating my higher self. It's way too complex for a brief time here, but it's complex because it's real, meaning it has very specific access levels, a very specific language, each level of the higher self. And the higher self is cultivated daily to regulate the unconscious ego self. So there's a lot of reflective work done, for me, a lot of nomenclature, but when you master it, it brings great clarity to the inner life. And once there's clarity and regulation to the inner life, then we can start living lives of purpose and not get derailed by dysregulation within and dysregulation with other people. So a lot of my work is about what I call musar hitbonenut, so that we can get to the realm of the soul.
So you shared that in your wisdom counseling, a place you begin with a client is you ask the following question. What is your theory of the good in your life? Please provide as detailed an answer as possible to what is for you an optimal life. And then you look at their answer and compare the gap. So how would you answer that for us? What if for you is the optimal life?
Well, I focus on my relationships because my wife has one person to be her faithful shepherd through life, as she is mine. So my quality of life is determined more than anything on my wife's willingness to shepherd my life in a conscious, loving, with kavanah, with intentionality. So I want to be that man. I have 4 children. I have grandchildren. My kids have one dad. So I want to do everything I can that whatever this vocation called husband is, whatever this vocation called father is, it requires thought. I can't just say, well, I am a father, so therefore I automatically know how to do it well. I have to check in. I have to ask my children what they want of their dad. I have to ask my wife what she wants of me. Now, what somebody wants of you doesn't mean what you're supposed to give, because sometimes people want things that they shouldn't want. It's very, very complex. It requires a lifetime of work and study. So optimally, for me, it begins with my family. It goes on to my extended world of close relationships. Certainly my work as a rabbi, what kind of rabbi I want to be, what kind of counselor I want to be. So in every important arena of my life, I have a detailed vision of what it requires of me. So you'll notice that it comes down to duty, meaning if I am engaged in life in a certain way, certain duties are entailed by that arena of my life. And I see this in my jiu-jitsu club. I'm a citizen of my club. I see it when I walk into the store. There's a way you treat other people. There's a way you treat employees. So you want to walk around attuned to the world, aware of the world, accountable for your moral code, and adaptive to the world. But we carry within us the profound duties of being a human being, but within that is the profound potential joy of being a human being, where when we're not dealing with our mess and the mess that other people make, there are moments of great nourishment, of great love, of great joy that we can create, as long as we don't get distracted by those other things.
In that regard, what's the role of God in your optimal life?
In my optimal life, well, there's another part of my optimal life, which is my spiritual practice, which, it's interesting you're answering this, because in my teaching, my virtue and wisdom teaching, I studiously stay away from the idea of God, because I want it to be entirely non-denominational, no religious persuasion whatsoever. But I recently taught a class on the soul, which was one of the deepest experiences that I've had. So for me, remember, God is more of an experience. It's an experience, authentically an experience of the soul. And so when one goes into the realm of the soul, and again, I think this takes some spiritual practices, when one goes into the soul, there's a presence there that is ultimately, I call it a fountain of life, a fountain of light. I feel it flowing into me. It's a fountain of love and grace, chen v'chesed. It's drawing me toward my purpose as a human being. It's a source of inspiration, wisdom, and guidance. And so when I go down into that realm, I feel most deeply, as it were, at home within myself. Now, I don't go in there praying for guidance. It's as if I am seeking guidance, Elie, it happens in there. So that realm of the soul is mostly a non-verbal realm for me. The natural language is a symbolic language. It's a quiet, eerie kind of a place to go down into that grotto. But on the other hand, it's a profoundly fulfilling experience to be, down near the fountain of the divine flowing within. Psalm 36 talks about, says, Ki imcha mekor chaim, because with you is the fountain of life. Be'orcha nir'eh or, in your light we see light. So if anybody wants to have a textual focus for this, it would be Psalm 36. I'm forgetting the exact verses, but I think about 10 to 14 or something. But in the middle of Psalm 36 would be the best way to describe my experience of the divine.
And if you have a college student come to you and say, why or what would I gain from the study of Torah in developing my soul, what would you say?
It's a fraught question, because it depends on how one studies Torah. So I have found that there are many people who are good scholars of Torah, which means they know the text, they know Rashi, they know Rambam, they know Mefarshim, but there's no spiritual development. So my question is, what are you after? And if a person says, I'm after spiritual development, I would say you need to train yourself something in spiritual development so the text can speak to you. Because I know many people who know Torah pretty well, but their spirits are dry because they don't know how to take Torah study and make it into a spiritual practice. So I would say to this student, side by side with studying the text, if you mean Torah as text, also study Hasidus, especially Hasidic practices of linking consciousness with the soul.
So I want to read, because I want to learn from you now, Psalm 36, verses 10 to 14. And
if I'm right.
Have you just say a word about it.
All right, so...
No, I'm going to read it first so that everybody has it, and then you just teach, on one foot.
Okay.
This is Psalm 36. For with you is the source of life, Makor Chayim.
All right, that's the end. Let me actually do it in order, and you'll have to find where the English is. It starts
Okay.
with Maya kar hazacha Elohim. How precious is your
Right.
chesed, God, your loving kindness.
So that's verse 8.
Okay, go ahead. So start with verse 8.
How precious is your kindness, O God, chastecha. The children of Adam take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They will be filled from the abundance of your house and from the stream of your delights. You shall give them to drink. Ki imcha makor chayim, for with you is the source of life. But orcha nir or, in your light shall we see light. Extend your kindness to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright in heart. Let not
Okay.
the foot of egoism
Okay,
overtake.
that's where I stop.
Okay.
Because that is the meditation after you put on the talit. So if you want me to break it down,
Yeah. Go
Maya
ahead.
kar hazacha Elohim. So first of all, this is the experience of God's chesed. It's not a theological knowledge of God's chesed, but the actual experience of God's love and grace within the soul. Maya kar hazacha Elohim, uvenei adam b'tzel kanafecha yechesayun. And human beings in the tzel kanafecha, in the shadow of God's wings, yechesayun, find refuge. So again, that's that sense of going into the soul and finding refuge down in that realm. It's as if for a moment you let all the concerns of this spiritual work that I talked about go down deep into the soul. Yirviyun mideshen betecha. They shall drink from the deshen. Deshen is a wonderful Hebrew word that has a sense of rich abundance. So we will, as it were, our souls will be nourished by the deshen of God's abode. Uminachal adanecha tashkem. Another beautiful metaphor. With the river of God's adanecha, God's Eden, God's delight, we will be, as it were, watered. So that's a wonderful mixture of the physical imagery for inner spiritual practice. Ki imcha mekor chaim, because with God is the source of life. Now remember, each of these words from a meditative perspective, you sink in too deeply. So I would say, I chant it to myself. Ki imcha mekor chaim, be'orcha nir'eh or. So I have my own chant for this that I say just about every morning. So the idea of God is Mekor Chaim. Mekor is a fountain, the fountain of life. And then in that God's light, we see light. And at the end, Meshoch hazacha liyodecha, draw your chesed to those who know you. Now, this is a very important term for me. When people ask me, do I believe in God? I prefer to go to this pasuk from Psalms, where I believe myself to be a knower of God. So this psalm introduces that term, many other places as well. To be a knower of God, not a believer in God, because that implies a kind of a propositional theology, some series of statements about God, as opposed to a knower of God. To those who know you, and your righteousness, to the upright of heart. So in the rules of Hebrew poetry, the knower of God and the upright of heart are understood to be somewhat synonymous. So how does one become a knower of God? One has to be of upright heart. Now, unfortunately, not everybody who is upright of heart is a knower of God, and that's where we need that additional spiritual practice. There are moral people who are not spiritual, and there are spiritual people who are not moral. So we need to do the work of actually combining those. So that little verse from Psalms, which is the meditation after putting on the talit, you might say is the core of my experience of the divine in the soul. I'm really glad you took me there.
That was a beautiful exposition and a reminder of the value of text to give context for the sharing of something that transcends.
Thank you. I rarely get asked it, but my inner life is filled with memorized Psalms and Psalms and Proverbs. And why? Talking about the Christ of consciousness. If you don't intentionally memorize beautiful poetry, your mind will memorize whatever comes across in social media. So what you have to do is you have to consciously manage consciousness. And one way to consciously manage consciousness is to read and memorize beautiful poetry. And for me, that begins with Psalms and Proverbs and other parts of the Bible. including other poetry. But for me, I study Psalms and Proverbs every day. I memorize every day. And I sometimes have a pasuk shel yoma, a pasuk of the day that I set as my ot al yadecha v'totafot beinecha. And when I have a quiet moment, I go and I meditate on that pasuk, and maybe it'll stay with me for a week, and the week I'll go on to another one. But I'm going to recommend to everybody here, find a good translation of the Bible, find a good teacher, memorize biblical verses, take them not just memorized here, but that you break your heart on them. Amy, you remember my doing this in the liturgy class, where I had people memorize liturgy. If I may just say, when I had students give a little Devar Torah on one piece of liturgy, and they pull out a piece of paper and start to share, and I say, I want you to tell me what it means to your heart. I said, speak from the heart. And some students actually burst out crying that they actually touched their heart and then interpreted a bracha from their heart. It's a beautiful thing when you take a line from the liturgy or a line from the Bible, and you break your heart with it, and you memorize it, and then you constantly go back there. So in this, the work of consciousness on the purely spiritual side, I believe in intimate relationship with text. By the way, this is a very Hasidic practice as well. I can talk about that if you want more, but deep connection to text as filling the river of the soul. And then from that, we work on character and musar and virtue and wisdom. So for me, it's virtue goes down to soul, and then soul arises into virtue.
So a young person comes to you, that same person, and says, why should I be Jewish? I can be spiritual. Why should I invest in Jewish belonging? Rabbi Finley.
Well, are they born Jewish?
They're the child of somebody who chose to be Jewish.
Okay, well, I would say you'll need a practice. You'll need a system of language. And I say, if this is the system of language of your home and the people around you, then try this system out, because I know other systems. I'm partial to this system. But if a student were to allow me to teach them one pasuk from the Bible, one bracha from the prayer book, they're in. There's no reason to go anywhere else if you're looking for a system of spirit and a system of morality, a system of consciousness, a system of depth. There's nowhere else to go. But you see, if they come to challenge me, we have a different conversation. But if they're actually coming for insight, I will initiate them into the mystery of our enchanted orchard.
So in a moment, I'm going to turn this over to Ari to field some questions. But my last, to kind of segue to the practical, this young man comes with his fiance to see you before the wedding. What are the 3 practical pieces of advice you have for them about a happy marriage that is different than what a therapist would say?
First of all, I would need to see what's going on. I always ask couples, how do you spend your day? What's your morning like? What's your afternoon like? I want to get a sense of their rhythm. And here's one thing I want to be sure of. The first thing is they have fun together. That they feel comfortable, they feel a refuge, they feel unguarded, that they joke around, that they clown around with each other, that there is just a delight that they have that they don't share with anybody else. Now, in that, there's the chemistry, in that there's admiration, and there's a sense of, moments of the awe and the beauty that you found someone into whose soul you see and who sees into your soul, these wonderful magic moments that have to be nourished and guarded by incredibly careful communication, which is my virtue practices. So I would say once I feel that a couple has that sense of joy, admiration, comfort, transcendence of love, then I would teach how to guard it with wisdom and virtue. And
one key suggestion in guarding it?
no anger and criticism on one hand, and watch the bad Jedi on the other. That's forever.
Thank you. All right, there's a lot of people who've been listening in, and I know they too want to share in asking questions. Ari,
Okay.
go ahead.
Do my best right now. So thank you for the terrific conversation, Rabbi Spitz and Rabbi Finley. It was deep, thoughtful, meaningful. We are doing a 4-part series on Hasidic masters right now with Donnie Massing, so you can go there. We did a whole month with Ariel Berger on Hasidism, so CSP's got a lot of resources, and there's probably endless amounts as well. One question people asked Rabbi Finley is how they can take your class. Are you teaching anything right now that people can take with you?
I am on break right now. Go to my website, rabbifinley.com. And I've taught classes in Hasidic psychology, actually great Hasidic text. There's a master meditation manual written in the middle of the 1800s that I've taught. It's mind-blowing. It's phenomenal. It'll break your heart and break open your mind. I'll go back to that. I do my classes in virtue, wisdom, the spiritual psychology of the prayer book. So I have a curriculum that I go through. I've just been, teaching it so intensely for so long. I'm just on a break to recharge my batteries a bit. But yes, I will be teaching again, I would say by the middle of the summer. Thank you.
Okay, great. So one thing we didn't talk about was a little about your evolution and becoming a rabbi. So my question is, you were a Marine for 3 years.
Correct.
You are a black belt in jiu-jitsu.
Correct.
You are very familiar with Buddhism and other Eastern religions. And you're a rabbi. How do all those pieces come together? Particularly, I'm interested in the Marine part, but jiu-jitsu, Eastern Buddhism.
Sure, I'll try to be as brief as I can. I realize our time is limited. First of all, I was a thoughtful young person. I was reading Camus and Sartre when I was in 9th grade, so I was always very deep and reflective. I would say I had an existentialist bent. I say step 2 was I had the incredibly random good fortune of having a spiritual teacher in high school who actually selected me. And I studied with him every Wednesday afternoon for 2 years. It turns out he was in the Gurdjieff School of Thought, and there's nothing like having a spiritual teacher when you're 16. In fact, one reason I went into the Marine Corps, specifically the Marine Corps, was I felt I was not prepared for the spiritual life that I knew I needed. I was too distracted. I was in Southern California, 1973. Now I have to say, I had an outstanding Jewish education. I had a wonderful synagogue, wonderful rabbis. I was in Young Judea. All the Jewish stuff was excellent. And thank you to the Jewish community, and thank you for the funders of the Jewish community for providing that wonderful education for me. But nothing got to my soul. And it could have been me. Maybe I was just blocked off from it. So the spiritual teacher, Jack Bishop, he opened me up to the world of the soul, and I realized I'm just not disciplined enough. So one option was go to India, into an ashram for 3 years, or I could go in the Marine Corps and get the GI Bill. So I went in the Marines. I got the shaved head. I got that a little bit. I couldn't talk for 3 months. We were on a vow of silence. So it was kind of like an ashram. And so the Marine Corps was actually an essential part of my spiritual journey, a very essential part. It gave me everything I wanted plus more. I cannot believe how wise I was when I was 18 to join the Marines. It was in the Marines when I had the insight of becoming a rabbi, by the way. I've often told, I'll just say one little brief story. One thing they would do is they would exercise us beyond exhaustion. So we're running down the beach and we begin fainting, and we're all 80 guys in my platoon are strewn across the beach and panting and breathing sand in, and the drill instructor looks at us with contempt and says, at the Battle of the Chosen Reservoir, we carried out our dead, and you people would have left the dead behind. And we all felt ashamed that we're not worthy of the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, the insignia. And we all stood up. And I thought to myself, what just happened? He told a story and it changed our bodies. And that moment stuck with me forever. And I remember, I know that my religion has stories and verses that are supposed to change us, but it never did. And I thought to myself then, I want to do what he did, but I don't want to be here and have to do it. I want to do it out there. And that moment of that a story, a text can change who you are as a human being. That happened to me sometime in probably August 1973. That was a foundational moment in my forging this path. So from then, and went to my undergraduate degree in religion. Everything since then has becoming a rabbi, and my PhD to a rabbi to teach Judaism, and my PhD to understand religion in general. The Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I like to fight, so it's like, it's not that spiritual. It's just, some people like to bowl, I like to fight.
So I went to your synagogue once, but I understand from Mark that at Ohr HaTorah, when you met in person, I assume you do online now as well, there's a morning piece where you would teach something, you would lock the door. So if you didn't come to shul by a certain time, you could not come in until services actually started. You would teach. And then I saw you teach much of this, what you were talking about, from the bima, another teaching spot during the service. Do you have a focus that you set out each year, each month, of what you're going to teach during that closed period and then from the bima, or are you reacting to current events?
Well, thank you. Yeah, we closed the doors because people would stream in and then ask a question about what I just taught 2 minutes ago. So we said, look, arrive on time or sit it out, because I can't keep starting over. And when a person has a question, they stick their hand up and they say, answer my question. I said, I just mentioned that, so I'll try to be on time. Yeah, so it wasn't as severe as lock the doors. It was, please be on time. Yeah, so what I do is I'm always studying variety of things, and when something speaks to my heart, I teach it. And so I would, at my 9 o'clock study session, whatever I was studying, I would teach, and then I would get questions, and I come back with a sharper version. It might last 2 weeks, might last 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and then it rounded out and it matured and it felt like a finished product, and move on to something else. So yeah, I had the curricula would come from what I study, gestating in me, and then yearning to be taught, and then interactions with the community, and then it would shape into something, and it became fully formed, and we picked the fruit off the tree and move on. I hope that describes it adequately.
So, but you are still leading services, I understand, online, correct, right now?
Yes, what I'm doing now is I've moved that so-called morning thing. That's where my online teaching, I moved that to Wednesday nights, because I didn't expect people to be able to stay that long on the mornings. So for my Dharma class, it's Wednesdays at 7 once I start up again. And what I do now online is an hour Torah teaching, which I'm loving, because I used to have to try to teach what I want to teach in half an hour, and I could never get it out. And now that I have like 10:30 to 11:20, I'm in heaven. So that's my schedule now. Every Shabbos morning, I teach from 10:30 to 11:20. We have a little bit of davening beforehand, but it's mostly an online teaching experience.
Without going into any contemporary political issues, how do you react to issues in what's going on in the world or in America from the bima? Is that something you react to? Is that something you don't do?
Well, sometimes, but I usually need a specific question. And the specific question, the more specific you get, it's always going to have to come down to some realm of moral psychology, of rational moral thinking. I mean, if it's a moral problem, we have to think about it carefully and understand what our options are. So what I don't like is slogans. I don't like hatred. I don't like people whose opinions are created only from their first emotional reaction to something. So whatever you want to talk about, I'll just say, let's talk about it carefully. This is actually the Jewish way. The Talmudic way is let's dialogue carefully with each other and build knowledge, not just argue with each other. So I don't argue with people. I try to gain clarity. So whatever the issue is, I'm after rational clarity and then bring in moral axioms.
There was a question. Can you repeat those 4 C's that you mentioned earlier?
Oh, yeah. No, first of all, no speaking in anger. I'm going to put that as obvious. No criticizing other people, including unsolicited advice. People do not realize how utterly devastating unsolicited advice can be to a young person. It is criticism, because what it's saying is, you don't know what's up, I do, listen to me. So no criticism, including unsolicited advice. No complaining to a person about themselves, especially insincere why question. Why are you standing there? Why are you doing that? Don't do any of that. No condemning. Now that's obvious. Accusing, blaming, labeling. I wish it were obvious, but many people start conversations with an accusation, start conversations with blaming. So I call that condemning. And then escalating conflict. After 1, 2, 3 go-arounds, somebody have the wisdom to say, hey, we're not getting anywhere. Let's take a step back and get back and try to have a rational, conscious conversation. So criticizing, complaining, condemning, escalating conflict.
Terrific. You talked a lot about Hasidism, and there was a question about nigunim, and do they play a role in your spiritual practice?
Yes, I do chant nigunim, but I chant my own. I have my own small repertoire of nigunim that I apply to the Pesukim, the verses that I memorize. So I have my own nigun practice. If you asked me to chant a traditional nigun right now, I have to go look it up. But if you ask me for one of my nigunim, I know it, I just can't chant it because I don't have a good voice. But I'm very satisfied with my own nigunim and my own vocal capacity.
Question about prayer and the fact that there are many prayers where we ask God to intervene, heal us, help us, do things for us. How does that tie into your philosophy of our relationship to God? We're asking God in these prayers to do something.
That's a great question. I don't not say those prayers. Look, I've had sick children. I had a son in war. So yeah, I petitioned God. I'm not ashamed to petition God, but at my core, prayer is an act of communion with God. So, look, we all have different spiritual personality types. And if your spiritual personality type is to petition God, then that's what you should do. That's authentic to you. It's never, ever been authentic to me to petition God, because I don't see myself as special, as exempt from what happens to everybody. So if something's happening to a lot of people, who am I to be exempt? I'm part of this thing. We're all in this thing together. So in the Hasidic path, you might say language carries a different dimension. If I can just give you an example, think of the two first terms, Baruch Atah. Now the word Baruch, people say blessed, but if you look at the word grammatically, it's source of blessing, not blessed. And I can back that up grammatically. Now think of the word Atah, and Elie, I know you'll get this in many people here. If you say the word Atah with complete kavanah and you don't burst out crying, you haven't said the word. If you say the word Atah to God and you can say another word, you haven't said it. So when I say Atah, that's it for me. Sometimes that's all I got. It's an I thou moment with God, and I better stop talking right there because anything else is going to be superfluous. So when I say you are the source of blessing, I'm done. So I can give you words from the liturgy. I can give you phrases from the liturgy where I chant them to myself, and I'm really overwhelmed with God's presence. So the liturgy for me is it holds on to a wealth of spiritual experience. The Baal Shem Tov says every word of the prayer book is a portal into a world filled with angels, souls, and worlds. Malachim, nefashot, olamot. So try to think that a word of a prayer book is a petach to a cave, and you go in the cave, and it's filled with angels, worlds, and souls. And you go into that cave, and then when you come out, you go to the next word. So it's not like the usual thinking that you're going from one word to the next. You're going to one cavern to the next. So it's a whole different way to experience the prayer book.
Thank you. We're almost done, but we have so many questions. One question is someone that
I can stay if you can stay.
We can stay a little bit longer. Again, this is a start of a series of very important contemporary Jewish thinkers, and you've shown us why you're one of them and the first one in our series. People have asked, what is the role of yetzer hara? Why did God create that? Why do we have that in us?
So remember, when we say why does God, do you mean why does the author of Genesis chapter 6 have God noting that there is a yetzer hara?
Well, yes, you could say that, or you can say we all know we have that in us, right?
Yeah, we all know we have it. And God notices it. It never says Vayivra Elohim et yetzer hara. That never says that. God notes Vayar Elohim, and God saw Kol yetzer machshavot libo rak kol hayom. All of the yetzer, the shape. By the word yetzer means a shape. Litzor means to shape in Hebrew. The shape of the thoughts of his heart are all bad all day long. So God notes it with some surprise and great sadness. So the yetzer hara, as it were, is an unexpected byproduct of creation, according to the authors of the certain strands of the book of Genesis. So we're going to put that aside. We have a yetzer hara. Now, what is the yetzer hara? The yetzer hara is a force within us that, just as I said at the beginning, that we all have a vision for ourselves. The yetzer hara does not like that vision. In fact, it has an opposite, contrary vision, and will fight us every step of the way for our vision and fight us for its vision. Stephen Pressfield has a great book called The War of Art. He calls it resistance, which is a perfect word. It's resistance to what you know is your code of virtue and wisdom. So in a more complete version, when I teach wisdom work, I say we have to have the vision, which is where I began tonight, the will, which is a very deep thing that is not easily understood, the skill to counter the yetzer hara, vision, will, and skill, the skill to counter the yetzer hara, because the minute you have the vision and you try to will the vision, what's going to happen? The yetzer hara is going to come in and do it. And that's why you have to have the skill to fight the yetzer hara.
I think a last question before I hand it back over to Rabbi Spitz. Your mentors. I mean, are there people in this world that you have seen that are either not broken or really not that broken, and you look up to them? I mean, who are your spiritual mentors that they can?
Well, if they claim not to be broken, I wouldn't look up to them. So let's go and start there.
Okay, so who are your?
I don't look up to mendacious people. Everybody's broken. If a person won't cop to their brokenness, I'm not interested. So my teacher, Jack Bishop, was a profound influence. When I was in rabbinical school, LA Hillel community had hired Jonathan Omerman over from Israel to mentor spiritual seekers, and he was my teacher for 10 years. He taught me Hasidus, he taught me Sfat Emet, he taught me Chabad Hasidus, he taught me Bratslaver Hasidus, he taught me Zohar. So I would not be who I am today without Rabbi Omerman. I just want to, I don't probably do this enough because I'm not asked that question. Rabbi Omerman had a profound shaping influence on me as a rabbi and human being. So, and then I would say, a hidden mystic would be my drill instructor, Sergeant Throneberry, that I can talk about another time. So I'll mention three: Jack Bishop, Sergeant Robert Throneberry, and Rabbi Jonathan Omerman.
Yeah. Rabbi Spitz, I'm going to hand it back over to you to wrap up this terrific hour.
So you shared with us your spiritual practice to begin your day. What is your spiritual practice to end the day? What do you do before you go to sleep at night?
Yeah, it's very similar. I start out with the wall of virtue because I want whatever my yetzer hara is up to, I want it to be contained. Then I go to my wisdom practice. Assuming I get through that, then I go to my depth practice, which is usually the Siddur or the Tanakh. So it has 3 dimensions. Now, part of my practice at night is to review my day. How did everything went? Did I act with virtue? Did I act with rationality? Did I act with wisdom? But a focus more to the depth practice to be in tune with my soul. Because I believe that if we're not in tune with our souls, we feel disconnected from life. I mean, there are many people who wake up one day and they say, what am I doing? What's my purpose? What's happening with me? Because they're not in touch with their souls. So I use the Siddur or the Bible. I have one sitting right over here. Sometimes I know where I'm going. Sometimes I turn to a random page, because each of them, the caverns are built. When I open the Siddur, there's a cavern behind every word. And I just go into the enchanted cavern behind these words, and I settle into my soul, and I feel God's presence, and I feel my soul, and I feel my purpose and journey in life, and it all comes together, and I feel a mishivat nefesh. I feel I've regained my soul. It's so easy to lose contact with your soul, and that is one thing that I think if I can leave people with anything tonight, whatever I teach, it's be rooted in the journey of the soul, and have the journey of your soul connect you both with the love, light of God and the realm of the shadow. It all has to be worked through. Let that flow up into the wise management of the inner life. Let that flow up into what I'll call day-to-day consciousness. I say the 4 A's: attuned, aware, accountable, adaptive. Let that shape what I call the higher self, where we reach into the higher elements of our concept of the divine: love, justice, truth, beauty, and the holy. So for me, there's a whole system at play here, and and I'm very, by the way, I didn't come up with a system and then do it. All this just came from practice. So if you like this, you come and study with me. But the core of it is know your soul and have your soul translate its concerns into wisdom and virtue. If you just want to, what's the thought of Rabbi Finley? It's soul to wisdom to virtue.
So I want to thank you for being an exemplar of lifelong engagement with the search, and with doing so with the awareness of the light that comes through the broken parts. And this is a moment to say, this is part one, and I look to Ari. Clearly, there's more to explore in how to apply what you pointed us toward in this conversation today. Thank you,
I want
Rabbi
to thank
Finley.
you for your very generous, spirited interview. I feel that you and I are operating on our own spiritual connection. Ari, as you know, a longtime admirer of what you bring to the, not just Orange County, but to the Jewish world. Yasher koach to you all. This is wonderful what you're doing. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I hope you've benefited from it. It's been really an honor and a pleasure to be here. And again, Rabbi and Dahlia, so glad you're here, and it's an honor to be back with you again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go rest. Keep safe. Don't go to crowded spaces
Bye-bye.
without your mask. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye, everybody. Bye, Mark Bialy. Bye, Podwalls. Bye, Amy. I'll see you in a second.